Hi, everyone. My name is Dan Janicek. I'm the Grants Manager for Portland General Electric. Today's webinar is Applying to the Renewable Development Fund. In about 30 minutes, I'll go through some best practices, some pitfalls to avoid, and the best possible information I can provide to give you the best chance to being a successful applicant and getting your project funded. I'm sure there'll be some questions throughout. I'm hoping to answer most of them, but if anything is project specific or is not covered, please do reach out. My contact information is at the end of the presentation. With that being said, we'll move right along. So learning objectives, what we think the major takeaways from today should be is understanding the RDF, the Renewable Development Fund broadly, some historical context to keep in mind where the money is coming from and what we hope to do with it. We hope that you'll be able to determine if a project is eligible. We try to have clear eligibility guidelines, but then we really want to get into what is an effective application and making sure that the preferences and the strengths of your application shine through so the selection committee can hopefully get you awarded. I also want to talk a little bit about good, quote unquote, and bad applications. Mostly what this means is just things to avoid, some eligibility issues that have come up in the past, and just giving you every tool possible to craft the best application so that your organization can hopefully be awarded by the end of this year. Finally, we'll go over the funding timeline just so that you're aware of what the next steps are after you submit your application and what you can look forward to throughout this year. Again, so the agenda, history and purpose of the RDF, what makes a good project, some examples of past successes, go over the eligibility guidelines so you know just what is eligible and ineligible for funding. And then we'll also talk about requirements versus preferences. There are some differences, things that we have to see because of how the RDF was formed versus preferences that the selection committee has come up with over time that give applications a better shot at being funded. We'll go through a few application examples, just some things that seem obvious to avoid, but I really want to make sure are clear. Again, we'll go through the funding timeline to know what the next couple months might be in store from an evaluation and selection standpoint. And then we'll do a little wrap up with some next steps and some content information at the end so you can reach out with any specific questions not covered here today. Okay, history and purpose of the RDF. So the RDF, the Renewable Development Fund, is made possible by our over 225,000 Green Future renewable energy customers. These are customers in our service territory who decide to elect to pay more for renewable energy in their homes or their businesses or what have you. Those programs directly or indirectly fund the Renewable Development Fund. It's been around in its current state since 2016. It is a competitive process developed to help fund local, commercial scale, renewable energy generation projects. Since 2016, we've awarded over $16.5 million to 75 projects, resulting in just over 16 megawatts installed and or currently under construction, which is fantastic. We need to see projects that have some educational, social, and or economic benefits to their communities. So in essence, since the funding for the Renewable Development Fund comes from our renewable customers, we want that money and the value of the projects to flow back to those communities. So that's why we're so focused on having community benefit in some way, or hopefully in multiple ways. And this is beyond just providing the green electricity that we know is very important and crucial to our future, and looking at ways to engage with the communities more and more if possible. We also partner with the Energy Trust of Oregon, and that's to make both of our budgets go a little bit further. That keeps everything moving forward as much as possible, as well as some technical verification from the Energy Trust, because they're more experts in that space in terms of the really fine details of a solar installation specifically. So eligible project types, you'll hear me talk a lot about solar PV. That's been by far the most popular renewable energy option for this fund. That's due in part to the solar resource here in our territory, as well as some of the scaling and cost issues associated with some of these other project types, especially on the size of the projects that we get most frequently in the RDF. But it doesn't mean other eligible energy types are ineligible. We actually would love to see some of these projects. Really what we need to see is that it generates renewable electricity. So wind, geothermal, low impact hydro specifically, wave and tidal energy, low emission biogas, and I'm sure there are some others that aren't included here. But those are all eligible project types because they generate renewable electricity. So anything that falls under that category would be eligible for a pure project type. Of course, there are a few other strings attached, but we can get through them later in the presentation. So you know who you're up against. This is our team of evaluators. We think that it's important to have multiple people involved in this process just for some unique perspectives, as well as bringing certain lenses to the table that help round out our understanding of a project. So the first line is the Energy Trust of Oregon, myself as the grants manager and our third-party evaluator. Those are the people that you will be working with most of the time, especially upfront. It's that partnership allows us to hopefully cover a lot of the questions in the application and provide really succinct, helpful answers. The Energy Trust especially plays a key role as a partial funder for all eligible solar projects. We do require an Energy Trust incentive if you are eligible to receive it before you apply to the RDF. So it's very important that you're working with the Energy Trust early and often to reserve that incentive and then use that as an attachment in your RDF application. After about 3 months of evaluating, of interviews, and doing deep dives into your application, there's a presentation to the Internal Selection Committee, which is made up of PGE employees throughout the company. These represent different departments, different teams, again, different perspectives. So when we're doing our evaluation and ultimate selection, that we can have a really good feel and sense of the different aspects of a project and the different interests they might represent. Finally, we make our recommendations to the PUC, the Oregon Public Utility Commission, as our governing body. They have the final approval authority. So once we are finished with our recommendations, they sign off, and then we can really start the process in earnest. And after that approval, it would be the agreement, the reporting, the construction, and then hopefully at the end of that, the payment. So that's kind of who you'd be dealing with over the course of a project. To give a little context of those projects that we've funded the last couple of years, this is a map of all of our projects since 2016 that have been awarded. As you can see, fairly densely located in the Portland metro area, but starting to extend more and more. That's something that we're definitely trying to focus on this year and moving forward. We realize that there is a lot of great opportunities in areas that we have that have been fairly underserved, and we want to recommit and refocus on those areas to make sure that they are receiving funding, they're receiving equipment, they're receiving the education that they deserve to move them forward in the renewable energy game as well. The colors here, purple is 2016, yellow is 2017, green is 2018, blue is 2019, and red are our most recent in 2020. Hopefully we'll get to have some more colors and some more expansion here for 2021. And the next slides are a few examples of projects that have been successful. The Oregon Zoo was funded in 2016 on their Education Center. It's a 216 kilowatt solar array, and they also incorporate that energy and that system into their sustainability curriculum. So they did a great job mixing the physical installation with some educational benefits to all the visitors that come to the zoo every year. Really great visibility into what renewable energy could make possible for students just learning about it for the first time. The Banks Fire District out in Banks, Oregon, was funded in 2017. It's an 86 kilowatt solar array that covers nearly 50% of the energy demand for the fire district, or the fire station rather. They are nearly an all volunteer fire department, so all those overhead costs are the savings from those overhead costs are really, really crucial. They go into training, they go into better equipment for the firefighters that make them safer, and they're also connecting to the schools to let students learn more about renewable energy and more about a possible career in firefighting. So a really great way to support the community through some critical services and help save them some money. Orchards at Aranco 3, this is also from 2017, is a low-income multifamily housing project. So the solar you can see on the middle there, and there is another array that's hidden beyond the building or directly in front of you. This helps keep rent prices low by offsetting common area energy. So that's a popular project type. This helps introduce or at least make people aware of renewable energy. It has financial savings to the tenants that they're obviously need as much as they could get. And they also get to learn and live in a place that they can be proud of, that's more sustainable, that hopefully has less energy demand and therefore has a better or lesser environmental impact. Finally, our final example is the Boys and Girls Club out in Rockwood. It's about a 100 kilowatt solar array, again from 2016. So the electricity generated here helps lower the overall operational costs. And that funnels more money into programming, into classes, events, tours, after-school care, everything the Boys and Girls Club is known for. So this is part of their brand new building. Really tremendous effort and a very clear line between the value of the solar and the impact to the community. So this is exactly what we're talking about when, of course, generating green electricity is the #1 priority. But what really makes projects stand out is their connection to the community and how that solar helps fuel and helps power other things, be it educational, be it economic savings, and other community benefits. So I think like these last 5 examples, just because it's easy to draw the line as to how they're benefiting the neighborhoods they exist in. So now I'm going to talk a little more specifically about what makes a good application, kind of what we're seeing and what we've prioritized in past years. I really want to hammer home the point that tell your story. It helps the committee understand what the full impact of a project is when we know how it connects to an organization's mission. Why is the RDF needed for this project? What are the benefits? That really goes a long way to help to separate the best of the best projects in around when it's again a clear context as to what this will do, how this will help the organization, and how this will help the organization, how this will help the community the organization is in. So in terms of who is eligible, there is a focus on not-for-profit organizations. For-profits are eligible, but there is a strong preference for nonprofits. That includes municipalities, schools, healthcare facilities. Multifamily housing has been a very popular area, state and local government buildings as well. So anything that's a not-for-profit is going to be eligible, and for-profits, but that's those are a little bit less competitive based on the preferences and requirements laid out. Essentially, it has to be a commercial scale project or organization. So no residential housing or residential buildings. So multifamily, that's of course okay, but if it's just a single family home, that doesn't really meet the standards and the focus of this fund. So what can be funded here? We get some of these questions quite often. Multiple projects by the same party, yes, can be funded if you're a contractor or you're a host organization with multiple sites. We can fund multiple projects. You can include those all together or separate them out into individual applications. It's really personal preference there, but you can have multiple projects in around be eligible for funding and ultimately get funded. We like to spread the wealth as much as possible. We think there's a lot of need out in our communities, but if it's a good project, there's not as much be focused on giving to one organization if they have multiple strong projects. You can expand existing projects. So if you already have a solar array at a site, but you need an additional array to cover more of your energy usage, or if it's been a number of years since that first project was installed, you can have a new expansion, but it has to be new and separate from the original project. It can't be it can't be tied back to the same inverter or the same string of panels, for example. It needs to be independent, but it can be co-located. Educational content can also be funded. So again, we realize that awareness and outreach is very important when it comes to renewable energy, and education can take a lot of different forms, but we want to encourage that as part of your application, and we're offering partial funding of that. Funding for the educational content of a project is capped at 5% of the total RDF award request. So for example, if you request $100,000 from the RDF for a project, that's the total request from the RDF, then 5% of 100,000 would be eligible for the educational award, and so $5,000 in this case. The selection committee can decide to not fund the educational portion if that isn't compelling to them, but it will not hurt your traditional renewable energy project request if you also request educational funding. And finally, community solar projects are eligible. We think that these are really important projects that are happening in the community. We think especially the low income aspect of them is particularly compelling. So those projects are eligible. They might take a little bit more explanation or require more detailed information from the applicant, but they are eligible to be funded. And what can't be funded. And I want to be clear, eligibility doesn't guarantee funding, but these are some things to keep in mind of what can and now what can't be funded. So you're not including those in your application, or not, applying for things with a budget that is outside the scope of the RDF. So we're focused specifically on energy generation. So energy storage does not generate electricity, so it is not eligible to be funded. We do like seeing storage and batteries as part of a project scope, but they will not be able to be funded by the RDF. We have to avoid soft costs as much as possible. Steel in the ground is really the narrow scope of this fund. So permitting fees, some administration costs, marketing, things that are just not going into the nuts and bolts of the design and ultimately construction of the project should be avoided as much as possible. There is a cap on funding, so we expect the applicant to bring at least 15% of eligible costs to the table. So therefore, the RDF can fund a maximum of 85%. Now, 85 is the max from all outside funding sources. So if you have, let's say, 10% from the Energy Trust and additional 10% from another source, that would decrease the RDF amount. But the applicant needs to bring at least 15% to the table, and the rest can be covered by outside funding. So 100% funding is not eligible. Additionally, one applicant cannot apply for more than 1/3 of the fund. So there's a couple different numbers to think about there. So your total RDF ask can't be more than 1/3 of the total available dollars. And you have to bring 15% to the table minimum. So however those numbers work out, that would be the cap for your funding for an individual project. There is also a green energy technology 1.5% for green energy technology that might be required for some projects, depending on the organization type. That is also ineligible because that is a requirement of that project. We cannot fund requirements. We are funding additional renewable energy above any requirements. And then the last two, a little more self-explanatory. We're really focused on commercial scale. So anything over 10 megawatts is just going to be starting to get to utility scale, and that seems to be a little bit out of our comfort zone as a fund. So, keep things small, smaller than 10 megawatts. A vast majority, nearly all of our projects are far below 10 megawatts. Usually somewhere in the 50 to 200 kilowatt range. And then off-grid projects. The project needs to be grid tied either to PGE service territory or via a PPA directly with PGE. So no off-grid, needs to be grid tied to get those benefits. So now that we've gone through eligibility requirements, I want to talk what the preferences are. So a little bit of a nuance there. These are things that are not required, but have made applications stronger in the past, and are things that the selection committee has focused on that they would like to see more of. We do have a commitment that 30% of all award dollars will go to culturally specific organizations, focusing mainly on the BIPOC and AAPI communities. So we really want to put our money where our mouth is, and we know that those communities are underserved, that we have not done right by them in the past, and we want to make sure that our funding is directed towards them at least 30% for a given round, and try to support the endeavors in those communities more and more. Multifamily and low-income housing projects have strong competitive advantages just because of the populations that they serve and the number of people impacted by a potential project. I mentioned some other technologies and techniques that we see, energy efficiency, energy saving, energy storage. Great to see those elements, even if they're not fundable. We do think they improve the overall scope of a project. We also like to see those educational efforts. That's really should be baked in as part of your project to know how you're going to tell the story of renewables and sustainability, especially at the site. We think having that direct, tangible connection to a project really helps the understanding of what's possible. And finally, cost sharing, while not a requirement, is nice when a applicant is able to bring more to the table. As a reminder, this is a reimbursement grant, so the money will have to be floated regardless, but the smaller the more the cost share that's possible just allows the RDF money to go further and have more projects come online, which I think we can all agree is a great thing. When we're rounding out understanding of an application, this is a little chart that I think helps to visualize what an acceptable application is. I think some of these are more readily apparent than others, but I wanted to go through them. So completion, very crucial. Please complete your application. Please answer every question as if applicable. But no need to go through a 5-page answer per question. You can be succinct, but make sure it's complete. As a service, I do offer a completion review for any application that comes in 1 week before the deadline. So please take advantage of that if you're able to. Not a requirement, but it just sometimes helps get another set of eyes on that. The areas I want to focus on are the project readiness circle, the community benefit, and the financial feasibility. RDF exposure is a little bit more self-explanatory. Signage, recognition, websites. We hope you're excited about this project, so we hope you want to share it with your virtual or your physical community as much as possible. The other three, so project readiness, we're talking about, is the project well developed and ready to go? Have there been site visits, feasibility studies? Is there a timeline and a budget and a design that all seem to make sense? So is it ready to go? If funding is approved, can the project start in earnest, essentially, once the word is given? Doesn't mean the project has to already be installed or permits already have been in place, but at least the research and the due diligence has been done ahead of time to know that things can move forward in a timely manner and installed by our deadline. Community benefit, we've talked about this before, but what's the additional benefit beyond just electricity? This is where it's important that you collaborate with your partners to tell the story of the project. What is the full impact? Who's involved? What are you hoping to do with it, and how does it align with your mission? We really want to look at the triple bottom line when it comes to these projects, the social, environmental, and financial benefits and aspects to help round out the understanding for our selection committee. Finally, financial feasibility kind of ties into project readiness a little bit as well, but any assurance that the cost of this project represents good value. What are some industry norms? Is it cost competitive? If there are higher costs, why? Is it a unique application? Is it an innovative technology? It doesn't need, we're not trying to get the cheapest of everything, but some context as to what else is happening or why this represents good value for the cost is really important as we're trying to make these decisions between a lot of deserving projects. We also like seeing, cost sharing, any other sources of funding that might be possible. It certainly helps, and making sure that all the costs that are asked for as part of your project budget are eligible. Going back to that slide from earlier. Again, this is a reimbursement grant, not an upfront payout. So some financial health of the organization kind of bleeds into the financial feasibility aspect as well. We're partners in this, and we want to make sure a project happens. So we want to support you in any way that's possible. With that, we've gone over the eligibility requirements and some of our preferences. I want to look at some common pitfalls or some issues that have come up before with applications. So this is a copy of a project budget as an example. So there's some things on here that are ineligible. You'll see there's some TBD costs. So this is an application with a bunch of costs that are not finalized. That is not going to count as a complete application, even if you don't have those numbers exactly detailed. Well, we need the best estimate at time of application. So a TBD is not going to work here because then we won't know the full cost of the project. We won't know what an appropriate ask is, and we don't know how to track those project costs to know if it landed on budget when it's complete. Another issue here is the 100% funding, where the maximum is 85%, given whatever situation this is in. So again, ineligible, not a complete budget. Not to mention there is a battery component on line G that would also not be eligible. So a lot of things wrong with this budget. So please make sure you're double checking that before submitting. Here's an example of some context in the application. And if you read through, you'll see that there is a developer has not been chosen, or a solar contractor has not been, committed to yet. Now, we don't need you to have the contractor, already under agreement, but we need you to have a contractor in order to create the more technical documents, the one line, the site plan, picking out the equipment, all things like that. Also, it obviously, allows your budget to be a lot more confident in your budget if you have the actual contractor or developer telling you the cost of some of those line items. So here, without a contractor being selected, it's hard to know if this project would really be able to move forward. So maybe it would be eligible, but likely not a competitive application at this point. Again, this is the community impact section of our application. So we're talking about community benefits. How do you tie the positive impact to this back to the people in the communities? And it sounds like this applicant hasn't engaged at all with the community, hasn't thought about additional benefits. They haven't discussed it outside the organization. So while maybe not ineligible, certainly not what we'd like to see. We want this to be a community-centric project. and really benefiting those that either utilize the organization or live and work nearby the organization. So how's it going to benefit them? So involving the community early and often is a huge plus for any successful project. This is towards the end of the application, talking about costs and financing. And the real hang up here is question 13. That's saying, essentially says the RDF is not needed. So the budget can accommodate the project, but it'd be a nice to have. And that's really not what the RDF is meant to be. We're looking to bring additional resources onto the grid that wouldn't happen otherwise. So in a situation like this, where the project could happen without our funding, well, we're probably going to look to projects that wouldn't happen without our funding. It's important to answer the questions honestly, but we hope that if you're applying for this fund is because you want this project to happen, and the only way possible is with some co-funding from grants or other partners. So it's very important that we know that we're helping this come online, and that's additional benefits to our customers and our community. And a last little example, this is a project timeline. And is this enough information? You can tell this project was from last year because it said, the 2020 timeline of they develop it in June, install it in January, and complete in February. We need a little bit more information than that. We need schedules. We need to know when the permits are being applied for. When is the delivery of the materials set to arrive? When is work going to start? When are inspections going to happen? Not saying we need to know every single minute of every day between now and finishing, but we need something more concrete than this with some milestones so we know how to track against it and know if you're making good progress. Not because we're trying to check up on you. We just want to be good partners and support these projects. So the more we know ahead of time, the more we can help push towards those timelines to make sure things complete and that the community can start benefiting from the project as soon as possible. As we're wrapping up our last section or two here, talking about the RDF timeline, just so you know what comes next after applying, and you can better prepare you and your team for the evaluation process and the ultimate selection process. So as you're well aware, the application is open at portlandgeneral.com/RDF. It's open until June 1st this year, with likely a very similar timeline in 2022. We do require an Energy Trust reservation letter if you are an eligible solar project. So if you meet those requirements, please work with the Energy Trust as soon as possible to get that incentive reserved, as that is a required attachment. As a reminder, we do not cover any required costs, such as the green energy technology requirement, and we can fund a maximum of 85% of costs, 15% minimum from the applicant. But if there are additional funding sources, then all additional funding sources would have to be 85%, with the RDF making up whatever chunk is necessary. And send any questions along with the application to the Renewable Dev Fund inbox, renewabledevfund@pgn.com. After application, it goes to the evaluation stage. Again, we have a third-party evaluator that does a great job looking at these applications deeply and thoroughly. There'll be some follow-up questions and some interviews, some phone interviews likely at this point. They're doing a technical, financial, social, and educational verification. So it's a lot of different categories they look at to help fill out their quantitative scoring rubric. That's not the only piece of information we use to help select, but it does help to compare apples to apples with the project if they're all being scored against the same rubric. So that'll happen, probably for about 3 months over the summer once all applications are submitted. And then selection will happen later this fall. We present and discuss amongst an internal selection committee that makes their recommendations to the OPUC. That's a pretty long meeting, and depending on the strength of the round, can take a long time, but that's good. We have a lot of great projects that are deserving of funding. Once we go to the PUC, they evaluate as a public process, and they ultimately approve at a public meeting. As soon as we know, then we contact all applicants of their funding status and feedback for those who were unsuccessful and award agreements for those who were successful. So said another way, here's the timeline for 2021. So we're in that first box of applications being accepted. We then move to evaluation for the next couple of months over the summer. Selection happens at the end of summer or early fall. We then send to the PUC, which is usually about a 2-month process. They have at least 6 weeks to review. And then by the time we get on a public meeting, it might take a little while. So late fall, early winter is when we're expecting approval, with word going out to all applicants of their funding status by the end of 2021, for better or for worse. And then the online deadline for projects in this round is the end of June 2023. If you're going to be way past that, it might be better to wait till next year, but you can also apply with that saying, you know, we know we're going to be the end of 2023 for whatever reason, and we can take that into consideration as we're evaluating. So if you have any questions about that, please let me know, but we do expect projects to complete by the end of June of 2023, with payment to happen right after completion, again, as a reimbursement. So just some key takeaways as we're here at the end. I like this as a project readiness checklist. So this is nothing official, but I think if you could check all of these boxes prior to applying, then you are well on your way to having a strong, complete, eligible application. I'm not going to go through these as kind of a summary of what we talked about today, but I think there's a lot of good information that kind of simplifies what you should be working towards with your team, with your contractor, with your community, to make sure it's well defined in the application. So final takeaways. If you didn't pay attention to anything else, this is the best slide to take away from. $2.5 million available in total. Again, remember that one project is eligible for at most of 1/3 of that. So 1/3 would be the total possible RDF award ask. But again, the project host still has to bring 15% to the table. So keep that in mind. The round is open until June 1st at 5 p.m. Please submit to the Renewable Dev Fund inbox. It's going to be on the next slide as well as a reminder. New generation only, can't apply for projects that are already installed and generating power. This has to be new additional generation that wouldn't happen otherwise. I really do encourage you to tell your story, allow our committee to have that context to see what's a compelling project, a compelling narrative, who is benefiting and who is being impacted by these projects. It really does go a long way to help us differentiate between similar looking projects. Where there's a big focus and push on diversity, equity, and inclusion this year and moving forward. We realize that we are not serving all populations equitably, and we are going to do our best to remedy that. So if your project is focused on those communities or can be oriented to those communities, we encourage you to look to those populations as needing some support on infrastructure-wise, energy-wise, funding, expertise, education, any of those. Really do encourage you to focus on those, and we will do our best as well. Cost competitive projects, cost sharing is always going to be welcome, allows our funding to go further and to have more of an impact on more projects throughout our territory, which is really important. Completion is expected by June 2023. If you have any concerns about that, reach out and we can discuss, but that is when we anticipate these projects to go live by at the least, if not sooner. And then just remember to reserve your Energy Trust incentive. If it's in process by the application timeline, that's okay, as long as there's been an effort to get that in. But we really need to see that amount of money in the incentive to make sure that your RDF request is reasonable. The Energy Trust is a big partner of ours, and we really want to make sure that we're all on the same page. So that'll be it. Thanks so much for the attention and for the interest. This is my contact information. I'd always suggest going to the website first. We have some great resources along with other videos that might be helpful. The Renewable Dev Fund inbox is the inbox I manage, also where you'll apply. So any questions there would be great. I'll get back to you as soon as possible. And then that is my desk line that does forward to my email as well. So you can always call me if you think you need to answer sooner, or if it's easier to explain over the phone. Please don't hesitate to reach out. This is something that I'm very passionate about and that I welcome questions about. So please get in touch whenever possible, even if it's about something for next year. This is my full-time job, and I would love to help in any way possible. With that, again, thank you for your attention. My name is Dan Janicek, Grants Manager at PGE. I look forward to some of your possible applications either in 2021 or in the future. Thank you so much.